Good evening, everyone. I call the January 27th, 2025 school board meeting to order. It is 6:02 p.m. We're in conference room C of the Fisher Administration Building at 12121 West North Avenue. Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Here.
Dr. Hoyt. Mr. Wadier.
Here.
Dr. Worley. Ms. Hammer-Walland. Here. Mr. Meyer.
Here.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Here. We do have quorum and we should be in our meeting. The chair would like to entertain a motion to adjust our agenda this evening to move recognition of winners of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Speech Contest ahead of public comment tonight.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. Any board discussion? Ms. Summers, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt. Yes. Mr. Wadier.
Yes.
Dr. Worley.
Yes.
Ms. Hammer-Walland.
Yes.
Mr. Meyer.
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. And that passed, and we will do that first and then move into public comment and then tackle the rest of the agenda. For those of you who may have followed along on social media, several weeks ago, the district conducted a contest for Martin Luther King Jr. So I believe several of these speeches were showcased online, several of the winners. We have some of them, I think, in the room with us this evening. I'd like to call them up. Dr. Jenny Hoyt has certificates and will meet you near the front of the room. And
Excuse me, Dr. Jessup Anger, we did ask the parents to come at 6:15. So parents are probably not going to, all parents are not going to make it for probably another 10 minutes. Because I was informed that excuse me, I have a sore throat, that it wouldn't happen until after public comment.
Okay. Public comment will probably go until about 6:45 this evening.
Okay. Would it be possible to wait just a few minutes to allow those parents to come?
Yeah, can we reorder and do another nation consent agenda?
May I have a motion to
I'll move the consent agenda before
move the consent agenda
agenda up to the beginning.
begin the meeting? May I have a second?
Second.
Second. And also the WSD
That's
discussion.
The
Mhm.
WSP
So if we need more time,
Mhm.
okay, just so say we can do that too.
Yeah, consent agenda and WASB.
Let's do those two.
Friendly amendment then.
So I have a motion on the floor to move the consent agenda and the WASB updates to now on the agenda. Any board, do I have a second on the motion?
I did a second.
Okay, Dr. Hoyt has a second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Morris.
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt.
Yes.
Mr. Wadier.
Yes.
Dr. Worley.
Yes.
Ms. Hammer-Walland.
Yes.
Mr. Meyer.
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. And that passes. My ducks in a row here. Are there any items on the consent agenda which board members would like to remove for separate discussion and action this evening?
It is recommended that the school board approve the consent agenda, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second? Second. Thank you. Any board discussion?
I did have a question about the change of contract that's in there. So we're changing it so that after the first 6 months, at that point, there is either a renewal or a non-renewal of contract.
I'll let Ms.
Okay.
Delazowski.
I'm just wondering why it has to be at that, like, so early in the contract. Maybe that's part of some legal thing rather than at 6 months before the contract ended. Does that?
So thank you for the question. The current language requires non-renewal action within the first 6 months of a contract. Thank you. Is that better? Okay. So the current contract requires action within the first 6 months of a contract. The action this evening would allow us to cancel that extension provision. And then the new language that we will bring forward will require action 6 months within 6 months of the end of the contract. So we're going away from the language that requires action 6 months in.
Oh, thank you. I think I misunderstood that. I understood that we were not doing the automatic renewal, but I did not understand that we were moving that time frame to 6 months before the end of the contract, which makes so much more sense.
Sure.
Just some context, and maybe Ms. Zelzowski, you can help me understand more. Before we pass this, it's been my belief that, for example, a newly elected board, the day they take office, every administrative contract that is of the typical administrative contract is locked in for 2 years. So a newly elected board with a mandate to do something different, to have a different philosophy, whatever, you only have the third year of your 3-year term to make any changes. And that's probably not a good idea. We need some ability to govern, and the superintendent as well. So how does this affect that? There isn't the rolling automatic extension so much as it had been. Is that correct? Or
So I think your comments bring up 2 points of clarification.
okay, please help me. I need help here. Yeah.
One is that administrator contracts are issued in the year that the administrator is hired. So while I have not gone back and counted the number of contracts that started new on July 1, 2024 versus the number of contracts that started new on July 1, 2023. But as far as when a new board member comes into office, some contracts are going to have a year left, some are going to have a year and a half, right?
Okay.
So the cycles would start, whenever that person was hired.
Is that under the new regimen or the old?
Both.
The proposed? Okay.
Yep,
All right.
that's been
always
true.
been the case.
That's always been the case, is
Okay,
that
all right.
the 2-year cycles, some are off years, some are on year, right? In terms of a new
Right,
board
okay.
member
Okay,
cycle.
but I know to non-renew, it has to be by January 31st. True.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so now in the, so if for contracts that would end in July of that year, that's so they're in their second year of the contract, the provisions would allow board members to issue non-renewal notices 6 months before the end of the contract, as opposed to 18 months before the end of the contract.
Okay, right. So
So it's
we've
providing.
gained a year, and
Yep.
our non-renewal is extraordinarily rare. I mean, I don't know that maybe like once or twice in 2020. But if you need to, you need to. And then you need to be able to if you need to, and this helps us.
So the language and the change that we are making and the language we are proposing is what is used in most school districts.
Okay.
I would like to say all, but
Right.
most that I'm aware of.
Tantamount to.
Mhm. That's typical.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep, of course.
Any other board questions or comments on the consent agenda? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyt. Yes. Mr. Wadier,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Hammer Walland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes, the consent agenda passes. Our next item is a report from Mr. Meyer on Wisconsin Association of School Boards Delegate Assembly.
Okay, thank you. What I'll do is we had the recommendations for how I should vote from administration. And I was committed to vote per those recommendations, of course. So I'll just roll through them if you want. 25-1, the Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding. That was yes, as we recommended. I'll also note that typically they have these little clickers that are electronic that count the votes, and then the count is displayed. Well, the clickers weren't working. So they had to go to a hand raise situation with big yellow cards. So it was kind of like, let me see here, right? So that made it interesting later on. But I kind of guessed it was maybe 70-30 yes on this one. I think the proportions can be informative for us. Two, the pathway to licensure for paraprofessionals, we recommended yes. It passed as yes. About 90-10. There was an amendment to strike the language to have bachelor's degree. And that amendment, the amendment to strike that language was defeated. And then there was an amendment to strike the word or. And I confess I don't recall whether that was voted down or not. I think that amendment was voted down and they stayed with the original language. 25.3, early literacy assessment for school learners. Administration recommended yes. I voted yes. And that passed maybe 95-5. 25.4, decoupling public and private school funding. Dr. Means and his staff recommended yes, but the floor discussion had some heartburn about this. They were worried that in essence, this would in effect, not by intent, by in effect become a Trojan horse, that they thought that decoupling would actually harm public schools' ability to hold itself up against funding for voucher schools because they'd be completely disconnected. And the legislature could just do one without there being linkage. So the floor consensus was that we needed to maintain this coupling to keep the visible relationship there, or it might get lost. So their objective was the same, Dr. Means, but they saw this as having an unintended consequence, and they concerned themselves with that. I voted as we recommended, but the vote was no. So that one did not pass. So that was one of the more interesting elements here.
Mr. Meyer, was that a split? You can split in the voting there?
No, it would look like 2080. Right? So it was pretty strong view that, you know what, we like the objective, but we just don't trust it's going to work out the way we plan. And so there were no accusations about anything, but they just said, no, we want to keep visibility, these two right beside each other. Sure. 25.5, consistent standards across all schools. Recommendation was yes. It won maybe 90-10. Then we went to 25.6. Dr. Means and staff strongly recommended yes. There was an effort to strike, there was a motion to strike 3K. And the reason put forth was in some communities, the business model for daycare services isn't very healthy as far as survival of the businesses to have daycare, private daycare in the communities. And there was a sincere concern that if we pull the daycare 3K customers out of daycare and put them in the school, we'll kill off some daycare companies and then not have daycare in the community. So because of the strength of the statements from administration, I spoke against the amendment to remove the 3K. And I quoted Dr. Means' words at the microphone, which was endorsed by another speaker later who said, for people who look like me, we need this 3K to stay in there. And the amendment failed, I'm thinking 10-90. So there was strong support for 3K. And then I spoke in favor of the main resolution after that, and it passed maybe 95-5. And when I spoke for, once the amendment failed, then I went to the microphone again and spoke for the resolution, and I quoted from here. text I hadn't voted the first time around. And so that was a pass. 25-7, staffing for mental health, it passed overwhelming, I bet over 95%. Now it's interesting to note by resolution 7, we were scheduled to go 1:30 to 3. And when we called the roll on 25-7, it was 3:15. People were starting to call the question on things. 25-8. See, 25, yeah, the mental health passed. 25-8, we voted no, and it failed. The no's prevailed by 2080. So that was voted down. 25-9, we recommended yes. There was an amendment to change foreign language to world language. There was, that passed maybe 55-45. And there was another amendment where it said, foreign language, world language, and technology with the intent, and they wanted to change it to foreign language and career and technical education. And it seemed like wordsmithing, but I kind of thought it actually unwittingly hit at the substance of what they were trying to say. Technical education, to me, is not the same as general technology education. But that amendment failed. They had to count the cards, 113 to 145. They actually had to count. Okay. So 25-10 on truancy, it passed. 25-11 on funding for school meal debt, they had a count there. It was 163 to 100, it passed. And then 25-12 was certainly going to pass, but somebody who was a professional expert presented a motion to change cyber attack to cyber incident so that it had a broader reach, and to change plan of action and or a policy to plan of action incident response plan. So the language more technically fit the technical world. And that was it. Thank you for sending me. It was a nice experience to do it again. Thank you.
Just for clarification, at the state education convention, were these actual policies or is this just show support for state legislation?
It is WSB recommendations for, it authorizes WSB to do advocacy, legislative advocacy.
Okay.
And some of the cautions we were given from the chair were, please don't wordsmith too much. A lot of thought has gone into this, a lot of effort, in committee and such. So think about unintended consequences. And if you wordsmith around, you might invoke some unintended consequence that, the idea that you need to vet the words and that a quick amendment, we won't have a lot of time to think through it. And also the notion that this is high-level policy guidance. Words are important, but at some point, you're just, splitting hairs on the wording. And we would all like this meeting to end sometime, So, as I said, we were about halfway through and 15 minutes past our scheduled meeting duration. So, but it did wrap up once. It's interesting. The farther we went, the later it got, the quicker the people came to the microphone to call the question, and the votes went pretty fast to let's call the roll and go home, right? So, but everybody cared. I don't mean to imply at all that, people were really sincere. It's interesting to see how committed and sincere people are about education of children, but there's efficient process as well. And we were less efficient when we had more time. And then as time shortened, we became more efficient.
So going forward, is the state education convention then pressing for new legislation? Would they is this legislation or recommendations for legislation that has been written? Or is it just broad
this and other board members, I'm sure you are well aware, Dr. Jessup Banger, more than me. This is put into a book of resolutions that have been passed. And that book, so to speak, includes past resolutions that are still in play. So once this is passed, it stays in the book until there's some affecting legislation on it.
Okay.
And it guides the people who advocate on behalf of the Association of School Boards on what to do.
It's providing guidance.
Yeah.
It is not providing specific legislative language
Mhm.
in most cases. Sometimes it's more specific than others, but in general, it's providing broad guidance.
This isn't like directly putting pressure on any legislators. It's just like if
I
they.
would say it is.
It is.
So the state school board association convenes once a year. And what Mr. Meyer is referencing is that school boards across the state put together, if they feel so inclined or passionate, they put together resolutions for their colleagues across the state to make a statement. And if the resolutions pass, then there is a statement that comes from the Wisconsin Association of School Boards that says, this is the stance of all the school boards across the state on certain topics. So Mr. Meyer's investment of time was very important. And there were a total of 12 or 13 different resolutions. Once they are passed or rejected, then that is the School Board Association's voice to speak to legislators, to speak to other organizations that govern public education.
So for example, if the legislature is considering what to do about funding 3K, question could come up, well, what do local school boards think? They could look at these proceedings and say, there was actually an amendment to remove 3K that was defeated. And then with 3K in the resolution, it passed by an overwhelming majority. So we know what school boards in Wisconsin think about funding for 3K public education. We know. It's pretty certain.
Well, thank you for the clarification.
For those of you watching in the room and at home, that's APSI in action. Thank you, Mr. Meyer, for the update.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for attending, Mr. Meyer. It is an investment in time, and we hope if there's any clarity that we can provide in the overview that we provide, I hope that was a useful document and assisted you and your vote for the board.
You're welcome for your thanks, but I will say, and in remarks for the full session later the next day, Governor Evers spoke, and it was his 43rd consecutive state convention. I've been there twice, right? Well, 3 times actually. So you can't hold a candle to 43. That's right. It's just to put it in perspective.
Yes.
43 conventions. Yeah.
We will now return to our recognition of the Martin Luther King Jr. Speech Contest Award winners. Ms. Holland, do you have any comments that you want to start out with?
May I start, as Ms. Holland makes her way to the microphone? We've felt as an administrative team that it was important for us to honor the life and times of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Often there are celebrations and contests that are more metropolitan driven, but Ms. Holland took the leadership of developing our own internally. As a school district, I'm very proud of this inaugural effort, and I see it just growing more and more. Ms. Holland did a great job in leading it and working with our parent community and our student community to really make this something very valuable. So thank you, Ms. Holland, for your leadership.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Means. So I am the Director of Diversity and Inclusion, the proud director for the Wauwatosa School District, and I am joined by one of the committee members, Kathy Erickson. These members had the privilege of reviewing and scoring the submission for the 2025 MLK Speech Contest. I am truly elated to stand before you tonight to celebrate the winners of the 2025 MLK Speech Contest. I am incredibly proud of all the students who participated, sharing their thoughtful and inspiring interpretations of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. Your voices reflect the power and promise of his vision, and your courage to speak up is commendable. A special thank you goes out to the parents and educators who supported these students in bringing their ideas to life. Your guidance and encouragement play a vital role in nurturing their talents. I would also like to express my gratitude to the other committee members who contributed their time and effort that could not be here with us this evening. Without further ado, I am delighted to turn things over to Dr. Jessup Anger, who will present the awards of participation to these amazing students. Congratulations again to all of the participants.
We'll call off the names of each student. If you'd like to come pick up a certificate of achievement from Dr. Hoig. And congratulations to all of you. We're incredibly proud of your efforts and your contributions to our community. The first winner is Jacob King. Tatum Renee Cloyd Banks. Nolan Sykes. Lillian Ford. Nadia Aquawatch. Ian Kirk. Desi Knudsen. Tyler Fritsch. Natalia Anguino Bucera. And finally, Cece Klingforth. Congratulations to all of you.
Can I just add that there's a video linked in board docs if anyone's interested in seeing the winning pieces.
Stand. Folks are welcome to stay. We understand if you have to go. There's a big celebration at the beginning of second semester. Maybe people aren't as excited about that. 3-day weekend. Thank you for everyone as we shuffled around our agenda this evening to move that a little bit early and then a little bit later. We have time set aside at the beginning of each meeting for public comment. And we will move into that item next. Members of the Wauwatosa School Board value the input of students, parents, staff members, and community members. The board's regularly scheduled meetings provide an opportunity for opinions and concerns to be expressed publicly. The board values all comments and will respectfully consider this input in decision-making. The board requests that individuals limit their comment on each item to 3 minutes. Following any comment, an individual board member may respond on the issue raised. However, it is not the intent of the public comment portion of the agenda for the board to enter into debate with a member or members of the community. Because non-agenda items are not publicly posted in advance, no action will be taken on public comment regarding non-agenda items this evening. We have 30 minutes set aside for public comment. Mr. Morris will keep track of time and let speakers know when they're getting close to their 3 minutes. And Dr. Hoig will track the 30-minute window. I know we've got a lot of public comment via email, which is another way to communicate with the board as well. And we had quite a few comments today about WSTEM. And what I'd like to do is to share from a timeline of some information around where things are at with WSTEM right now to provide everyone a common understanding of how things have played out over time. So I will walk through these dates. First, the district and board are committed to ensuring high quality education for all students within the community. It's the core of what we do, and it's why we sit and serve on the board and why people go into this profession. On October 28th, the school board took action to authorize offering a new 5-year charter agreement to the governance council that included a phase out of WSTEM at the expiration of that agreement. The board expressed its intent to work cooperatively to develop a new charter school with different curriculum focus that would eventually replace WSTEM. On November 6th, Dr. Means invited the governance council to submit a letter of interest for a final 5-year charter agreement with a term of July 1, 2025 through July 30th, 2030. By letter dated November 30th, 2024, the governance council responded to Dr. Means' November 6th letter and communicated, quote, formal expression of interest in exploring the proposed new contract, unquote. December 9th, 2024, a draft copy of the charter agreement being offered to the governance council was forwarded for their consideration and feedback. That feedback was to be submitted to the district by no later than January 21st, 2025. On January 5th, 2025, a correspondence from the governance council indicated it is not now entirely rejecting the district's offer, and that contrary to the governance council's prior letter of interest, was no longer willing to entertain a final 5-year contract. The January 5th correspondence threatened litigation if its demands for a 5-year contract were not met. The January 5th correspondence alleged that in December 2024, the recommendation to the board regarding WSTEM somehow changed. However, the board had already taken action as of October 28th to authorize offering a final 5-year charter agreement to the governance council. There was no further recommendation to make after October 28th, and the district's position followed board action on October 28th never changed. The January 5th correspondence challenged the soundness of the board's October 28th decision and also suggested allowing the current charter agreement to expire would be illegal. As an instrumentality charter school, it is this elected school board that determines if WSTEM's charter is in the best interest of the district. WSTEM's current charter contract has no renewal clause, including any language calling for an automatic renewal of the agreement based on allegations the district fell short of fulfilling requirements of Section 6.1 of the current agreement. The January 5th letter alleges that decisions made by the district about the future of WSTEM are somehow based on preferential treatment in the enrollment process based on race. The district has not made decisions regarding WSTEM's future or its charter agreement based on illegal race-based preferences. The governance council knows very well that a desire to encourage diversity in the educational program is very different than making enrollment decisions or decisions in the future of WSTEM based on race. The governance council itself has in many meetings with the district expressed an interest in increased diversity at WSTEM. The January 5th letter includes a proposal for a new charter contract that would significantly expand the governance council's authority, granting WSTEM autonomy similar to that of a private school, while continuing to be largely publicly funded. The proposed new charter also failed to provide for the phase out of WSTEM, which is the directive approved by the board on October 28th. The recommendation of the district's administration and eventual action by the board to implement a district-wide STEM program that includes the eventual phase out of WSTEM is the result of many months of analysis and thoughtful consideration. So those decisions were not made for reasons that were arbitrary or capricious or driven by improper motives. Wauwatosa STEM was established by the school board. The school's success has laid the foundation for implementation of a district-wide STEM program that will serve all students. As has been stated in previous communications, It is now important to recognize the impact of WSTEM has had on advancing the district's overall mission and instructional objectives. The board and district administration are grateful for everyone's important work on these efforts to serve our students and look forward to continuing to provide innovative educational opportunities within our district. I wanted to make sure that I read that in response to the public comment that we received previously and would invite folks now to share their comment.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Roberto Garcia, and I'm the parent of a kindergarten student at WSTEM. And this is my second time here to speak, and now even more disappointed. I'm here tonight to express my deep concern over the sudden closure of WSTEM and to urge the board to reconsider its decision to honor the 5-year charter extension, which was under current negotiation. The announcement that WSTEM will cease operations after the 2025 school year is a significant loss for our community and the state, and you know it. To be clear, contract negotiations were underway, and the Governance Council had invited all families to a special meeting tonight to discuss the latest draft of the contract expected from the district at the end of last week. A final version of the contract was to be provided to the council on January 24th, as it was mentioned, but instead, here we are. In the short time that we've been members of the Wauwatosa School District, it feels like there have been multiple changing narratives, shifting timelines that are not respected. I'd also like to make it very clear that our Governance Council is composed of volunteer parents like me that are speaking before you today, who have been upstanding, transparent, and highly professional in their efforts to work in this challenging environment. It is unfair to scapegoat them in this process, and I think that's important to say for the record and acknowledgement. Also, there are incongruencies with what we've heard in the board meetings this past fall to justify ending WSTEM contract and the letter that went out to the district last week. What we heard in the fall from several of you on the list, and I'll lay that out again, is that the innovation at the school was lacking and the scientific rigor was not there. That maintaining WSTEM and other Wauwatosa STEM programs will dilute the STEM for All plan, and that the school success were largely due to involved parents. The list goes on and on. Why was it necessary to tear down the school in that email to justify closing it? This inflicted a great deal of pain and loss of trust for the staff, the students, and the family that simply do not need to happen. Is ending the school in this way a success story to the entire community as it's being framed right now? We're abandoning a successful model without even evaluating the results for STEM for all. This will be unacceptable in business where my field is in. What if it does not meet the expectations? Just like the Spanish program that was sunset. And this leads me to a critical question for the school board. Why is the school board choosing to lower the bar for the district? What happened to collaborating with STEM over the course of several years to build a truly strong STEM for all plan? We hire capable leaders to deal with these complex challenges. Thank you.
Right. First of all, I do have some concerns about how the order went tonight with changing public comment, because you voted on items and you denied the public the opportunity to speak. So I think that's actually an issue. So one of those items was the approval of the owner's rep contract. I wanted to ask if who you've already approved, so public comment may be a moot point, but do we have a certified ADA specialist? We hire a lot of consultants in this district. Do we have a certified ADA specialist to help us? I completely understand why we need some kind of representative. We have a small Kevin, department. So who's the certified ADA specialist? I doubt there's one. There are very few in the state, but I think we need that. I think of Wilson. there was a community member when the 2018 referendum dollars rebuilt it. There was a community member who noticed a missing ADA element on the playground. I went and looked at it, and sure enough, she was right. I went and looked at the 3 other new schools. They all had this element. So who's responsible for that? Now, this is not new information. This has been brought before the board before, not only by the city's disability commission, one of the alderpersons, myself. We've brought this forward. So, I was going to suggest maybe part of that contract goes to perhaps hiring an ADA specialist. So I really want to know who is responsible for ensuring these misses aren't done. Because if we spend money on something, we should get it. If I put a roof on my house and somebody doesn't give me, 4 square feet of shingles, I paid for those. So there's a missing element. So and Building Solutions was the owner's rep. So are they responsible or somebody else? The capital improvement plan for tonight, I'm really going to suggest again, and I know I've been in several meetings with Kevin where ADA transition plan was described, asked for, where's the Wauwatosa School District's plan as required under Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Plan. I think that needs to really help us when we're picking with limited dollars, how things are spent. So somebody on the board, please ask, or that an ADA transition plan gets done. Sadly, Dr. Means walked out. I wanted to thank him for something, but I'll just skip to today's January 27th. Lynn Worley, thank you for your time and help with looking into International Holocaust Remembrance Day as is today. So I just asked LaShonda how we celebrated this. I guess there were posters sent out. I'm not sure what happened, but how do we ensure that this new policy gets followed and things are being shared out? And lastly, a thank you to Dr. Means, as all of you on the board know that I sent, and thank you for all of you who sent a message back about the legislative advocacy resolution. It's a draft. The beauty of drafts is that we can make improvements to make it better. And honestly, I looked at the last minute, his modifications. He's taken every one of the suggestions. So thank you, Dr. Means, for your time today.
Hello, my name is Chris Bauer. I've appeared to you in front of you over the past several years as an Eisenhower PTA president, as a PTA liaison, and as a private citizen. Now I'm a candidate for this school board's seat 2. Tonight, I'd like to thank the Legislative Advocacy Committee for their quick action on the state budget. As a treasurer of the Yes to Tosa Kids campaign, I spent months talking with Wauwatosans of all sorts, door to door, at community events, and on social media. The biggest concern I heard was how to mitigate the need for another operational referendum in the future. After the election, I directed my efforts there, and with allies from Yes to Tosa Kids, Save Tosa Schools, Support Our Schools Wauwatosa, and PTAs across the city, I was part of a team that developed an effort not only to influence Wauwatosa's legislators, but also provide the resources to help organize other school advocacy groups across the state to influence their elected officials. As part of that effort, I traveled to Madison in December to present at the Wisconsin Public Education Network State Budget Summit, to gather support across the state for our plan. It has become clear to me that in recent months that other Wisconsin districts look to Wauwatosa to lead in advocacy, whether that means lobbying for public policy changes, advocating for our own local referenda, or leading through transparency and data analysis and sharing with the public. I hope that the board approves the Legislative Advocacy Committee's resolution tonight, and that other school districts follow Wauwatosa's example. But this work cannot fall on the school board alone. My ask is to everyone tonight listening to help amplify this message and demand that our state leaders raise the reimbursement rates for special education. Raising the rates from around 30 to 90% would generate millions of dollars per year for Tosa schools and every school district per year. That change alone would go a long way to helping Wauwatosa avoid another referendum in 4 years. So I urge everyone to call their governor, your state representative, your state senator, to ask them for support in this critical change. We are long overdue for a state budget that meets the needs of our public schools. Thank you for your time and advocacy.
Hi, my name is Andres Romero. Every relationship, either is business or personal, who no longer want to be together, they will talk about it. They will just not text each other and call it over. Let's assume the position of superintendent is being terminated. I bet HR will talk with him instead of just sending him an email and having him walk out of the building. This is a personal and significant matter. The email we received last week about WSTEM closing seemed rushed, unprofessional, and lacking empathy. You mentioned that details will come this week, which clearly shows the decision was rushed. I assume, expect, and request that the superintendent and some members of the board visit WSTEM to listen to the parents, teachers, and students, like the two examples I shared before. You should be prepared to answer questions and explain all the details that were promised in the letter. As leaders, you own this decision. I look forward to your visit at WSTEM with the parents. Please let us know when this will happen. Please don't send an email, talk with us, and then formalize it with an email. We all know there were negotiations between the district and WSTEM. The district sent a draft and WSTEM responded. However, it seems that after just one response or challenge in the negotiation, the district decided to stop communicating and essentially ghosted WSTEM. Why did we stop collaborating? To me, a lack of interest in collaborating signals a lack of leadership and no interest at all in the families, the students, and the community. Sadly, this closure has become more of a political and personal agenda. Dr. Means, if the board, lawyers, or anyone in the school district is pressuring you to act in this way, we need you to stand up and tell them this approach does not align with the community values. We should be working together to find a solution because I'm confident one exists. To the school board, if the superintendent or anyone in the school district is influencing this decision or path and acting in this matter, I believe we have a leadership problem that needs to be addressed immediately. To be clear, today, I'm not asking you to keep WSTEM open. Well, maybe I want. I'm addressing how the situation has been handled so poorly by the school district. This mishandling makes me question the future of STEM for all, the school district, and whether closing WSTEM was a mistake. Thankfully, mistakes can be fixed, and I hope we can fix what happened last week. So, could you visit WSTEM this week? Could you visit WSTEM this week? It's your decision to close the school. We want to see the face of the people that is taking this decision. We want to listen to the parents, the students, the teachers. I want you to see the tears of the teachers the last day that I was at school. Have you talked with them? I assume you did. So, are you visiting WSTEM?
Hi, my name's Joanne. I'm a pediatrician and I'm a researcher here in our community. My kids have been both at Jefferson and at WSTEM. And like you, I care a lot about high quality educational experiences for all of our kids in Wauwatosa. And so tonight, though, I've got lots of things that I'd love to talk about lots of things we do in the district, but tonight I'm here for the decision to abruptly close WSTEM. Our kids are terrified and upset. Elementary school kids right now are COVID kids. They've had school taken from them already. So when we hear now you go back to your neighborhood school, it hits them differently. I work in an intensive care unit and I'm pretty well trained in giving difficult news to kids and families and convincing them that they're going to be safe and cared for. Oh boy, maybe your kids listen better to you, but mine aren't buying this yet. Second, our community. Not as much as you guys, God bless you for everything that you do, taking all of the emails and phone calls from all of us throughout the community. But I talk to lots of families whose kids are not part of STEM programs. No reasonable adult wants to see other kids lose. They want to see their kids benefit. I'm not here to argue for a charter school forever. That's your decision, and that's been a process that's been being decided. But it's short-sighted to smash a good program without a transition plan. We have such a good opportunity here in Wauwatosa for real-time peer mentorship as we roll out STEM for all. Even if the district leadership doesn't think that at the leadership level, there's more to learn from our existing STEM programs, I have to believe that our staff and our families throughout the district who will be responsible for supporting this new curriculum in all of our buildings might benefit from an experienced friend in town. Finally, money. This conversation isn't just about STEM, but it's about limited funding and resources. Every adult in this room knows the feeling of being behind schedule, out of money, annoyed with everyone, and just wanting to throw it all away and start over. That's like January in a nutshell, I think, for all of us. But like you, we're parents with jobs who volunteer our time and who want genuinely to make Wauwatosa better for all kids. And the agreed upon deadline for these conversations was so near, it was supposed to be tonight. We were supposed to be meeting as families with the Governance Council to discuss how to move forward. And so I ask if we could just respectfully take a breath and finish the process. Thank you.
I don't have any prepared remarks, but I figured since there wasn't a line and there was a little bit of time left, I would say a few words. So I'm from Wilson. That's where my oldest went, and she's now a STEM student, and my youngest is was supposed to be start to finish a STEM student as well. So I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to talk about both experiences. I'd say for my oldest, and I actually submitted a comment on this a couple of months ago, it's been a really beneficial experience for her, not just academically, but socially. That's actually where she's with Natalie, Joanne's daughter. And I'd be remiss if I don't thank all of you volunteers for spending so much time in a very difficult time to be in the school board. I guess the one thing that I would ask is that maybe there be a reopening of dialogue between the Governance Council and the school board and the district, because at least reading my texts that have been flying around in the last 20 minutes, there appears to be a pretty wide disconnect between the understanding of the board and what the Governance Council has submitted in terms of what I believe was sort of a negotiation and a counteroffer versus what's maybe been interpreted by the board. This is a big deal, but I also understand that there's a lot of other big fish to fry. It's not just limited to STEM. There's sort of just bigger macro problems, but this is a big deal to a lot of us, and I think maybe that was underestimated when this whole process started. And we're all going to be here, Lord willing, all the way through high school. So how this is handled, drives decisions as to what we want to do as parents. Do we want to send our kids to Longfellow? Do we want to send them somewhere else, or Whitman for that matter? So this is important, and a lot of people are really upset about this, in case you can tell. And it's really a shame, because I think we're all driving for the same general goal, which is a great public education for all, not just our own kids, but everyone else. So I would kindly ask that maybe we go back and have a discussion about it, because I think that's what we were all expecting. So thank you.
I want to make a comment. I deeply empathize as a parent and as a board member with your position. And I was really surprised that what I read in the rejection of our path forward that the board had agreed upon was what it was. And I don't. The board made an offer for a path to wind this down. That offer was rejected. The board didn't take any action. We literally are just accepting the rejection of the offer. I'm concerned about what the implication of that rejection will be for the kids that are affected. And I was surprised by it. And so I don't know if the governance council took to the parent community the response before they sent it to the board. I don't know if the parent community has seen the response. But in any decision that I think about and make as a board member, I'm trying to center academic achievement and thriving of kids. And that's complicated because there's wanting to set high academic standards, there's concern about health and well-being, there's a sense of belongingness and community. And so I'm one member on the board. I'm certainly always willing to listen and entertain. There wasn't much space. There wasn't much this. I heard what was rejected.
Kind of point of caution. To be clear, you're not disclosing what was discussed in closed session. You're speaking your own opinions. Just so I'm trying to help you here.
Yep.
Okay, Dr. Means is trying to help you over there too. We aren't agendaed to talk about this. Other board members, we each have our individual opinions. So I just ask discretion from the chair in the face of a challenging moment. Yeah. But that I will support the chair here that his opinions are his personal opinions and he's not disclosing privileged information from closed session to try to keep you safe here. Thank you for your smile, Dr. Means.
Good for online.
Transparency again.
Jamie, how much time do we have left?
9 minutes.
Yeah, Jamie, we've got time for 3 online.
Okay, Sarah Larand, you have the microphone.
Thank you. This is Sarah Loran, 2445 North 91st Street. I was calling in on 2 different issues. The first is that I would like to urge the board to join a growing number of districts across the country and adopt a safe schools resolution. I will forward to your email tonight a sample resolution and model policy that has been written by the National Education Association for you to review, and hopefully you will put it on a future agenda for discussion. The resolution discusses that every child deserves a chance to learn in an environment that is free from fear. And unfortunately, immigration enforcement may be happening near our schools and is creating a climate of anxiety and instability for immigrant families in our community. Parents may be afraid to drop off their children at schools. Students may become distracted or distressed or unable to focus on their education. These are not hypothetical situations. They are happening in communities and maybe happening in ours as well. So the Safe Schools resolution would offer a solution to ensure that schools remain safe havens for learning and child development and not fear. They would prohibit the collection of immigration information and set clear protocols for handling ICE requests. And this resolution would protect all students while upholding federal and state laws. So again, I will send these to you, and I hope that we can hear from you and have more discussion on this in the future. My second concern tonight is different. I have lived in and been an active resident for 18 years, and both of my children attended McKinley Elementary for a total of 14 years. My one son graduated from West, and I have another son who is at West now. I am very involved in my community, and over the last several months, I have heard a lot of tension around the school. Specifically, I am aware that a fourth grade teacher left in the fall, noting issues with the administration. And now at least two fourth grade students have withdrawn from McKinley Elementary this month. Those students are both from families who continue to have children in the district. They are not dissatisfied with the Wauwatosa School District. They are dissatisfied with the administration at McKinley. And they were not happy. They were specifically not happy with the meeting that took place in December, where the principal put blame on the teachers.
Time for the public comment.
All right. So I would like to know, I would like a review of what's going on at the administrative level there, because our culture of community and cooperation appear to be broken. Thank you.
Scott Lucas, you have the microphone.
Hey, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Hope that's a yes. Okay. All right. My name is Elizabeth Lucas. I am a parent of a child at WSTEM. I am not a voting member of the Governance Council, but I have attended all of the Governance Council meetings this year to be aware of what is going on with my child's school. And I just want to state that I believe that the Governance Council, the intent of the January 5th response was, yes, it was, rejecting the proposed contract, but they also proposed a new contract and welcomed further dialogue. And I think attempts to misconstrue that into an outright rejection are false. I think that the intent was to follow the agreed upon negotiation process and reflect the wishes of the families, which was to agree to the final 5-year contract, but to not phase out grade by grade. I also believe that at the October 28th meeting, the board did not vote to phase it out grade by grade. The board just voted to propose a final 5-year contract and did not include any language about whether or not it would be phased out. And I believe that that was the wishes of the parents and the Governance Council. And so I just want to make that clear. I would also like to say I'm just incredibly disappointed that the first communication that we got from the superintendent, Dr. Means, in this entire process was the email Thursday saying that the school would be closed in a year and that there has been no opportunity to speak with parents, nothing ahead of time. I know that when Jefferson and Washington were considering being closed, there was a letter that I went out well a year in advance. And it's just really hard to have that be the first communication from the district. And that is all. Thank you.
Brett Bordini, you have the microphone.
Thank you very much. Brett Bordini, 2022 Tree Lane. I'm a parent of a Tosa East High School student and 2 students at WSTEM. I wanted to come back to the notion of expressing surprise at the way that this entire process has unfolded. And I always try to assume positive intent when parties come together from different perspectives and try to come to a mutual understanding. But I guess I should probably say that there should be very little surprise on all parts. I guess there should be little surprise that the Governance Council chose not to agree to the contract terms as laid forth. And I think that it would be important for everyone in the community to understand what those contract terms were, and understand that no reasonable educator, no reasonable student and no reasonable parent would agree to operate a school under the conditions proposed. So I don't think there should be any surprise there. And I guess there also shouldn't be surprise that we got to this point when it really, again, I try to assume positive intent, but in the back of my mind, at every step of this process, it seems like we were proceeding from a foregone conclusion to close WSTEM, and we were just trying to find the means to that end. So I guess I'm the one who shouldn't be surprised at the way that this all worked out. But again, I always try to assume positive intent. So I'm hopeful that I'll be surprised and that there will be a positive outcome to this whole entire situation. I thank you for your time.
With that, we've expended our time for public comment this evening. Thank you all for your comments and for being here or online tonight. We will move into item number 5, strategic goal 6, operations, our monthly financial report.
Dr. Just before we move on, just can I ask a question for clarification?
Yes.
To Dr. Means, just a reminder to the public, the rules about a closed session and why the board has to be very careful as to what is said after a closed session, and why a statement was prepared.
Thank you, Mr. Wadier. There has been statements made about doing business behind closed doors whenever the school board goes into closed session. That is not, it makes it sound as if something nefarious is being done. There are legal rights or legal options around what you can discuss in a closed session. And it is, from a statutory standpoint, those 5 or 6 clauses for a closed session are stipulated in law because you cannot or nor should you discuss them in public. And so it's not as if there's any, again, nefarious rationale behind having those discussions in closed session. They're protected by law. It is also stated that when you have those conversations in closed session, that they're supposed to remain confidential and private. And that's the reason why they are conducted under that statutory logic. Anytime we go into closed session, we meet with legal counsel prior to posting for those meetings to ensure that the content in which we're going to discuss does meet the statutory threshold to discuss it. And so I guess in conclusion, sir, the reason why we have closed sessions is to allow the school board to function and to deal with confidential, sensitive manners in a private situation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Strucker.
Good luck with second semester. Yes.
This is our monthly financial report. Hopefully these are becoming relatively routine for the board and community now as far as kind of understanding the report. There's always also a video presentation along with it. So I'll just jump in and it should be more familiar than it has been, when we first started doing these. Usually the hardest part of this for me is getting the report up and running. Oh, we already got it. The slideshow going here. Okay, so we're discussing December financials. And as a reminder, typically we're discussing the prior month during the current month. Obviously, we're almost closed with January and we'll be discussing that in February. So, sorry, I've got to move around my screen a little bit so I can see the slides. There's a few areas we've been tracking over the months that we continue to track. Again, I'll just continue to kind of be on repeat. The main thing I'm always looking at is our salaries and benefits, that being the largest driver of our overall budget. We've been monitoring that, as well as in particular purchase services purchase services probably since the first month I started reporting on this. Those purchase services continue to revert to the mean. So I had talked about that probably every month, how we had early spending this year. Thank you. Actually, I learned something there I didn't know how to do. On our salaries and benefits, we're trending within 0.5%. And we are awaiting, I have a meeting with CISA 5 at the end of this week to get their mid-year report. So they have been going through our personnel line item by line item. It's a significant undertaking, roughly 1,000 employees. And so I'm awaiting that mid-year report from them to triangulate where we are with CISA's report. We're also going through another full reconciliation, comparing our payroll to our actual budget. So here's that picture of revenues. The main thing I want to point out here is I've talked for months about how we don't get we don't get our revenues, all in sort of 12 equal increments. You can see on the top is our November revenues, on the bottom is December, and you can see that big jump in state sources. That is due to our first equalized aid payment coming. So just a visual for you of, hey, here's the money has finally arrived. In January and February, you're going to see similar things in the local sources as we receive our property taxes. Again, just another picture of revenues. Here we can see that state aid arriving as part of the purple bar. And one more view. Here we're just breaking down revenues by major source. So just another visual of how our revenues arrive. All right, flipping to the expense side. I just want to show, I'm pointing out here, again, the top is November, the bottom is December. Where our, I've always called these speedometers and have been asked over the years, well, what is the tolerance level of, kind of how many miles per hour per over can you be over or under? Just pointing out in November, overall, we were about 1.67% over projection. We're at now 1.76. So I'd say still within that tolerability. And you can see on salaries and benefits, the thing that I am most concerned isn't the right, the thing I pay most attention to is we're 0.62%, now we're 0.54%. So again, looking pretty good.
Mr. Eckert, on that last screen there, you talked about the 1.67 versus the 1.76. Is there a number or a guide that you have? Is it 2, 3? Is it 1.5?
So no, because when I see this, what I do is I look at every item to see what stands out as a concern. Really, this just tells me what I should look at further on the next slides to figure out. Well, I'll give you an example. Early on in the year, we had a much bigger difference. That allowed me to know to dig in and see where that is. It was purchase services. And knowing that, then I can reach out to the people that were spending and finding out, hey, what's going on? And the response being, we bought things early. So it's really an indicator of where I need to look.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Again, just another view of expenses. On the left is last month, on the right is this month. Again, with these views, what we want to see is the dark blue bar, which is our projection. We want to see that close to the purple line, which is our actual. And then finally getting into our actual financial statement. This first one, the column I'll say on the left-hand side here is last year. So through December, prior year to date is the first column. Where we ended the year is the second column. And then where we were as a percent to that point in time is the third column. Comparing that to this year, current year to date, annual budget, and percent to date. Now, again, I pointed out here, federal revenue, I'm going to hit on the next slide, but I have last month, let's see, do I have it here? Yes. So on this slide, this is, again, looking at last month compared to this month. Here we can see last month budget and federal revenue. I had a green flag by it, anticipating we were going to be considerably over on the revenue side. That's due to our ESSER money having come in.
It's not sharing. It's definitely.
It's not sharing?
No, that's your slides, because this is what it looks like on Zoom.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it's thinking.
Corey, just cycle through one or two slides to make sure it refreshes. Yeah, it's good.
Sorry about that. Thanks for jumping in. You ever done those Zoom meetings where you go through, you're talking to someone for like 5 minutes and they say, just so you know, your screen isn't being shared? Like, that's how it feels right now.
Your sound is off.
Yeah, like, I'll start over. So I wanted to point out, we're going to be bringing some budget updates officially to the board in February that will include revenues and expenditures. But rather than continue along showing this, kind of significant favorable variance in revenues, I went ahead and updated it for the current month to show where we know we're going to be. Again, that'll come as part of budget adjustments next month for the board to approve. On the expense side, again, the top is last month, kind of where we were. Again, I'm always focused primarily on the favorable, unfavorable variance to see where we are. You can see we have 2 yellow flags last month, same 2 yellow flags this month, although both are getting a little better. That's on our salaries and benefits. Our red flag area, again, purchase services has been a red flag all year. We have continued to revert to the mean. Non-capital objects, you can see appears high. I'll say I'm on top of that, but that is I'll call it a distant-controlled expense. It's something we can turn on or turn off. And when we get closer to hitting our actual budget, frankly, I'm just going to turn that off so we can't spend anymore. To make it a little more relative, maybe right now we have spent almost $2.6 million to date. Our budget is $3.6 million, so we have $1 million more to spend. It's not, we haven't overspent that yet, and I'm going to make sure that we don't. But if I didn't have this tool, I may not be paying attention to that in the same way. Our overall variance is projecting at, roughly the same amount, about $100,000 more this month. And then finally, this is something I started showing last month. What this is if we'd been using, I backward engineered the tool to show what the board would have seen last month, if would have seen last year as of this month. And the main thing I see is, so this would be 2 years ago. Expenses were at 35%. Last year, they were at 40%. So that perhaps would have been an indicator to the board of what's going on, or could have allowed for a question to be asked. And then again, this is last year. Had we used this last year again to using it this year, the blue box is what things would have looked like last year. So we would have been projecting nearly a $5 million variance through this point in time last year. Decided just to start including also a trend so we can, it's hard to remember kind of month over month where exactly we were. So you can see this is just the trend month over month of our net projected variance. I've overlaid that with the orange line being, again, what if the software had been used last year? So our next steps for the February board meeting, I anticipate bringing the board official budget adjustments to approve based on, again, that revenue, going through all our expenditures, reviewing CISA 5s, salaries and benefits, and just making that official for the board as part of, it'll probably come to the finance committee first and then to the full board the second February board meeting. Any questions about this month's report?
No questions about the report. Assuming everything goes great because we're in this year for the CISA 5 kind of outside oversight, what's the life cycle there? Is that continuing year to year? Does that end after this year?
So we're just paying them an hourly rate. So we haven't locked into any sort of long-term contract. The board can make that decision. If we love what they did, we potentially continue on. If we feel like we don't need them anymore, we don't have to. So lots of options there.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we will move into our next item, still under strategical 6 operations, the 24-26 Fund 41 Capital Improvement Plan update.
Yeah, I'm going to invite Kevin up for this topic. I'll stay here as well, but he's going to be able to speak much better to this than I can.
Do you have any questions for Mr. LaFountain or Mr. Ecker after reviewing their attachment?
From our Finance and Operations Committee, I know.
Kevin, did you want to give a summary first or would you like me to?
Oh, of course, or I can go after you, or you want to start out? Should I just start?
Sure.
Okay. Can I share the attachments on the screen or?
You did a board docs. Did you send it in early? Not that you had to.
No, we had it all set up, I think.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm not sure. So if all are able to open up the current plan 24-26 update, you'll see in the packet, there's also 2 older versions. And the narrative explains the history behind that. Previously, there was a 24 capital improvement plan approved early last year of 24, an update in September that reflected updated projects, things that we became to learn needed immediate attention. And then now this plan has a look at how to realign our resources now that the referendum is passed and the elementary schools are being funded for deferred maintenance and other things that we've learned about that had a certain level of neglect and needed more urgency in repairs. So the highlighted items in green as you look through the document, and as you look at the column on budget status and budget for each year, you're either going to see something that was completed, an updated budget status for that project, or highlighted in green, you'll see the new projects that were added. A number of items at both secondary schools, we became aware of issues that, quite frankly, the regular operations budget can't handle that kind of hit. So we're recommending that they're included in this current budget year. So if approved, they would be, these debt work would be occurring the remainder of the school year. The other items in the 25-26 column are focusing attention to the most critical items in the secondary schools, while also realizing that there's still a plan developing for what will happen in those schools. I can report that the one item that's been on there for quite a while, surveillance cameras, we have bid review going on right now. Our hope is that Jamie and I can bring those bids to you at the February 3rd meeting for approval.
10th, or for the next February 10th meeting? You said?
I'm sorry, February 10th. I'm sorry. So that's pretty much it in summary. There is, as of the date indicated on the last sheet, there was a Fund 41 balance of over $3 million, just over $3 million. So with the projects from both years, there'll be a balance of around 440,000. And I think Scott and I are recommending that that money be held there for contingency as we discover more items that might occur over time. And also to clarify, none of this is all Fund 41 capital improvement. Nothing referendum wise is in this budget. That's an entirely separate budget that is off of this sheet.
Thank you so much for this. This is really helpful. I see in the 25-26 year, there's a couple things written for East that are then crossed out. Can you just clarify what that is?
Thank you. This was in previous versions that were presented to you. It was decided administratively that those two projects should be put on hold. Again, pending the secondary school modeling. That's the work is going on. They're very significant renovations. One had to do with, I think, the Champions program and where they're housed. And the tech ed remodel, there was some recommendations to increase visibility in an adjoining classroom there. So for the reasons of modeling secondary schools, it was decided to hold on those for now.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Fountain, on looking at just kind of updates here on, I was looking at between the 913 document and then I was just like the new one on here, but whatever updates we have on the pools at the middle schools. I know we had assessments, kind of TBD, the pool assessment recommendations, TBD. Are those both the same for both schools or do we have any insights on what those look like?
We know Longfellow's closed, so that's no longer an issue. There are some issues. That was an easy one right
Laughing
there.
because it's either no longer an issue or it's the biggest issue.
Right. I apologize. It's still an issue.
More delicate statement about the state, right?
It's still an issue. Yeah.
Well, it's closed, right? So nothing to fix. Okay.
It's yeah.
In your purview,
Thank you for.
you
letting
have
me-
no tasks.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Except making sure we have barricades around an empty pool. The recommendations that are more priority for us are at West, where I think I included a dollar amount. That work would be planned for next school year. The other middle school, Whitman Middle School, the needs there are not as significant, but I still wanted to highlight them as time permitting as we get the other projects off our table, that we would address those then, but they're not high priority.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Estimate as to the cost of the steam boiler replacement that's now.
That would have been a previous budget. That was one of the older. I think it's like 15 million. That first budget was the first one I presented to the board upon my arrival. And we wanted to identify it as a priority need, but also indicate how difficult it is to fund that.
Right.
And since then, it has been taking off as a project planning tool. Other questions?
I was just going to add a comment. Over the Christmas break, while we weren't in session, Kevin and Kevin took me on a tour of, I think, almost all of our buildings. I've still missed a few elementaries, but it was a good opportunity for me to get in and see things. I'll just say I was not prepared for the third floor of East. Honestly, I had a vision that it had, I was told it was closed. And for some reason, I didn't realize how long it had been closed. And I had a vision that we would open the door and it would just sort of be a relic, right? Well, Kevin took me up the elevator. And when I got off, the way I described it to Dr. Means was I felt like I was in that movie Escape from New York. And so I bring this all up just to say, if any board member or community member has not been to the third floor of East, I'd encourage tours because it is not like any high school or kind of district property that I've ever been a part of. And I just wonder how many have actually in our community have seen that.
Are we still storing pallets of bricks in the hallways?
Yes.
For
Yeah,
example?
there's some
you did.
reclaimed architectural facades from McKinley or something, I think, still up there. Yeah.
Yeah, it is
Historic.
quite a spectacle. And if you see people have signed the walls over the
You're
years.
giving it away for those that haven't
Yeah,
been there.
you know, like sweethearts and who've gotten married, you know, I mean, one of our facilities committee had an East alum and him and his future wife had been there and they signed, like you put on a tree, with a heart, okay. And the view from the old study hall is phenomenal. It is like a terribly wasted resource to not utilize that somehow, some way, maybe for an art room. I don't, there's just things, you just need to see it. I know, I totally agree. You need to see this to know, and you see the ducts running down the hallways for the air conditioning and it's everybody, the board should see this.
Yeah,
For different reasons. Good
I
and
would
bad.
agree.
Yeah.
There, many people, we hope, like especially among the administration, that there's some way to preserve this graffiti when it eventually gets remodeled. But get there before it's gone. It's like really something. I know Mr. Carricker, the associate principal, he went to East and his signature is up there too. So it's fascinating. It's amazing.
Any other board comments, questions, or musings about third floor of East or the finance report or the capital improvement?
No, I'd just like to say thank you to Kevin and his team because they're being really thoughtful and taking into consideration the projects that we do now and how that'll impact the future decisions of the district, making sure that we're not spending money on things or funds on things that eventually be remodeled in a bigger project. So I just want to say thank you to your team. I know that this is a huge undertaking and continues to be a huge undertaking.
Thank you. I would like to just also point out, if I'm pointing out the obvious, forgive me, but when you look at the balance in that fund, and the example I gave and the highlighted items in the current year, these are small items, but they're so important to the daily operations. We're not even touching the significant capital improvements still needed in those secondary buildings. So I hate to explain the obvious, but I just feel like I have to emphasize it because it's not going to look good in the next year if there's not another solution to it. So
$400,000 is not a lot to work with.
it's $400,000 is the emergency fund.
Right. That's still not, that's not a very big emergency.
That's not even about doing things proactively. It's about reacting.
One random question on building maintenance, Mr. LaFountain. Last week's extreme bitter colds. How did all of our buildings perform as necessary? I work with a lot of emergency response companies, and there were 17 schools in southeastern Wisconsin that had major issues with pipe freezes and secondary damage afterwards. So did we make it through?
Yeah, we made it. I got to give credit to our staff, in particular Kevin Hoyce, the operations coordinator. Kevin was literally up all night, either monitoring systems remotely and communicating with our building leads constantly through those 3, 4, 5 days that it occurred. And you can't prevent everything. There's some things that just happen, but I think his efforts really helped get us through that. And he should get a lot of credit for that. I will mention the previous cold spell. I forget which month that was, probably in December, I think. We did have that leak in the theater. It was an insurance claim. It was from an antiquated air handling unit above the theater. The insurance company determined it was due to wear and tear, that a coil failed. However, we can't get the coil out yet until we hire a contractor. But it did happen on a cold night. So we're not sure if the stress of the cold night, if it was misdiagnosed and it actually did burst. But that was one event that happened, again, for either one of those reasons. But it's also a good example of the wear and tear element, end of useful life, how that, I think I mentioned before, you're put at more risk. That's an example of that. But we did do well over the last spell. Thank you.
Another thing Kevin's been working on too is having a list of what needs to be inspected and how often those things have to be inspected. So trying to stay on top of these projects before it does become either a safety issue or an issue where, students wouldn't be able to go into one of our buildings.
Correct.
Which apparently wasn't being done because a lot of the projects that are listed on here really are like the gyms and the theater specifically.
Yeah, I think the gyms and the theater, a good example of that, yeah, where they should really have an annual inspection by an outside contractor that specializes in that equipment. Over time, gym apparatus equipment, the safety straps, the winches, there's an end of life period for those as well. Although you can argue very strongly that you don't want to compromise and extend that end of life duration, especially in a gymnasium or a place of occupancy. So we're going to catch up with these improvements, and then we're going to put in plans in place in the operations budget to do an annual keep on track with these things.
Mark.
So this is an observation from my home, and I'm sure you're on top of all this stuff, but to highlight for everyone the importance of, sensors and detectors and things even brand new fail. I have hot water heat in my home. There's a boiler in the basement, and the boiler was replaced. There's a pump that pumps the water through the house, and somehow there was a forging defect. It was a forged housing for the pump. There was a pinhole flaw that had not broken through. And when I was out of town on a trip, that 1-year-old, 2-year-old casting, that little pinhole decided it was time to break through. And it was squirting like a mist of hot water into my basement. And I have temperatures, because I have temperature sensors in every zone in my house. I have water sensors everywhere. Because the hole was a pinhole, it wouldn't have lost pressure sufficiently that my zones would have cooled down, that my temperature sensors would have went off. But I had water sensors in the room, and the water sensor went off. And I'm in the middle of Illinois driving north, and I get the notice on my phone, there's a water sensor in the boiler. And I get home from a long drive from Kansas, and had it not been for that sensor going off, I wouldn't have gone to the basement. And I would have been spraying steam and water in my basement for hours and hours and hours. You can imagine the damage that would have caused. So stuff happens, even the brand new stuff. And, anything you see in your judgment for sensors and detectors and everything, I'm preaching to the choir here. I know that, but just so it's highlighted for the board and everything, you can't save money on this stuff because it could bite you, in the end.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I'll quote Kevin Hughes, who said, on one of the cold nights, he said, I just finally turned off my phone because I was getting, I think he had like 182 emails from systems that email him about issues. Now, not to say he was neglecting them, but they were nuisance alarms, so that he had control over. But to your point, where we can, we do monitor that, and we are notified. Yeah.
Right. I had a nuisance temperature sensor issue last week.
Yeah.
Where the thing went off and I was asleep and the dog got woke up and the wife was trying to figure it out and without me available. And so there's the nuisance stuff too, but I'll take the nuisance because the time it wasn't crying wolf, it was a good thing. I
listened to every crying wolf. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you.
We have 3 resolutions. We want to wait until Dr. Means returns or?
Maybe take a break.
Maybe let's take
Let's take a 5-minute break. And then we will return. Thank you, Jamie.
You want me to read the motion before we go into the content?
Yes, we will do, so for those, we're coming back from a short break. We are moving through 3 items underneath board governance. As a reminder, for those who may have joined the meeting late, we previously moved report from board delegate regarding the 2025 State Education Convention. That was a report by Mr. Meyer earlier in the agenda, so that has been completed. We are now going to talk about 3 different resolutions that the Legislative Advocacy Committee is bringing forward. The first is action to approve facility security resolution. Dr. Hoyt, can you read this, please?
Yes. It is recommended that the school board approve the facility security resolution, and I so move.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Hammerland. Dr. Hoyt, can you walk us through this?
Yes. So I'll give the brief overview, and then if you have further questions, I will turn to Dr. Means to facilitate any deeper understanding. So essentially right now, as you know, all of our funding is put into sort of the same bucket, whether it's for academics or it's for the sort of facilities related to safety and security. While our referendum have upgraded some of our facilities related to safety and security, that is probably honestly a process that will never be done because new things will continue to arise, new technologies will continue to be available. What this resolution does is ask the legislative committee to separate out of our budget anything that's related to safety and security facilities upgrades so that we don't have to pull from our general budget in order to make those upgrades if and when we want to do that.
That's a great summary. Thank you. I think the shooting, let me ground our conversation of saying that the shooting that took place in Madison in December was awful. And as a school system, we were unable to talk about the ramifications of it. And one thing that I wanted to do in conjunction with our legislative advocacy committee was to move beyond sharing that our thoughts and prayers were with our colleagues in Madison, that we have to actually do something. I know that some of our schools need vestibules that are more secure than they currently are. And the fact that we are unable to have those conversations because of finances just doesn't sit well with any of us. And so this resolution is stating to the public and for this board and future boards that if there's a need for security issues, we shouldn't pause because it's not in the budget. As you heard from Mr. Ecker this evening, and as he's been stating, he's been doing an outstanding job. I didn't get a chance to say that earlier during his presentation, but our current budget is tight. And he told you that when we approved the budget in October, that it would have to be perfect. And that was not accounting for the things that CISA 5 and other things we'll discover throughout the year. But the security of our kids and our staff should not be contingent on a budget turning out to be perfect. And so this document in essence states that the board currently has the latitude through Fund 80 to utilize funds without, or to levy and to increase the levy without going to referendum. It allows you to do that. It allows you to raise the levy without having to go to a referendum. We believe that the schools of the public school district are the community schools. And Fund 80 is the community service fund. And our community is well served when the schools are safe. And so to that end, we know that we also pay for our school resource officers out of Fund 80. So with all of that being stated, this resolution is in essence setting the standard that this school board will pursue security measures immediately if you see the need. And if that means that you have to utilize Fund 80, then you feel empowered to do so. Questions or comments from the board?
Means can you give some clarity for the public there on exactly what Fund 80 is? I know that we have some things out there, but just for this conversation so they're aware of.
Sure.
What sits in that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moore. So the title of that fund is called the Community Service Fund. For school systems like ours that has that operates the recreation department for the community, we get very I would call it laissez-faire, and we utilize Fund 80 and we make it synonymous with the rec department fund. It's not the rec department fund. In most school districts, that is the community service fund, and it's a fund that allows, through the school finance structure, it allows a school board to utilize funds to serve the community. And so, again, the thesis of this resolution is that a safe school is the hallmark and the cornerstone of a community. When I think about how many community members go in and out of our schools 7 days a week, it is a community resource that is very, very important. And I guess the other thing that I would just emphasize, and we honored Dale Brightlow and his family a few years ago in this room, that, you know, if you ask someone who lived in this community, now we have families and parents who were students in our school district when Mr. Brightlow was murdered in our schools. It impacts an entire community when those types of violent acts happen in our schools. So Fund 80, again, is the community service fund. It is not, it's not governed under the same stipulations of being able to rise or increase that levy. You have the authority to increase the levy as you see fit if it meets the needs of the community at any time.
I'm just going to piggyback on that. So when we talk about the governance and compliance side of that, are there any restrictions or limitations on the use of that fund? And I'll pause it there only to ask the statement that was put out there. Are that communities are well served when schools are safe? Could people apply that same logic and methodology? Or communities that are accessible are a hallmark of our our school system, the community as well? Could someone construe and say, well, using this same fund, if it's community service and we're acting in the greatest good for the community, does that include, if we said ADA or accessibility outside of security or safety?
So yes, that's an interesting retort, and I accept that. What if the school board decided at some point to leverage Fund 80 or to increase the levy for Fund 80 for whatever reason? If you want to use the accessibility piece, if you want to talk about it from a security component, the next step in that process would be that the Department of Public Instruction, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, would then analyze and review the increase of the use of Fund 80. Now, it is a fairly dormant fund right now, so there isn't any flags being raised for the Department of Public Instruction. If they start to see school districts utilize this pathway, they may put some restrictions on it. They may not. But I think that's the next step. If a school board, not just this school board, any school board, started to leverage their Fund 80 in utilizing this logic. You've given me the charge of finding creative ways to ensure that our children are safe and that our schools are safe. So this is my in working with the advocacy committee, legislative advocacy committee, this is our creative way of trying to find a way to utilize communities' funds. So that's an answer, but it's not an answer. So I'll be succinct. I don't want to give you a political answer. The succinct answer is if this school district or any other school district starts to utilize Fund 80 in the way that this is described in this resolution, it will then be incumbent on the Department of Public Instruction and their auditors to raise a flag and say, what are you doing? We may or may not allow that to be permissible. Then we would have a response by stating, but we believe that it is in the best interest of the community to use it that way. Then it becomes a very philosophical loophole that they would have to try to close legally. But we're prepared to debate the Department of Public Instruction that way.
I was just curious.
That's a really good question. Thank you.
So I also had a similar question, and you may have already answered it. But when I'm 100% all for the safety and finding creative ways to fund it. But I think what Mr. Morris was maybe alluding to is, do we have a system of checks and balances in here if we adopt this, or are we, Mr. Meyer always says the unintended consequences, are we opening ourselves up to a future board doing something with this if we adopt?
The official check and balance is the Department of Public Instruction for them to analyze the expenditures and for them to come back and tell us that's not allowable, or we're questioning how you're leveraging the fund.
What would the, I guess, ramifications be if they came back and said, you can't do that? Like, what would
they may tell us
the penalty be?
Let's just imagine hypothetically that there was a $1 million project that we levied under the idea that it was for safety under Fund 80. They may come back and say, no, we're not approving that. That's inappropriate. That should go back into your Fund 10. Mm-hmm. And so then if you don't have an extra $1 million, then you're utilizing Fund utilizing Fund 10 in a different way. That's the potential consequence.
Okay, yeah, because my concern wasn't necessarily for like, say we needed to use $1 million to do an actual spec'd out vetted safety project. Just some people can, I guess, you can take that language, and the language is a little squishy, is the way the term I like to use. And what then where do you draw the line at what is a safety project and what is not? So before even taking the inference of applying a completely different word to it. First of all, just like saying, okay, where of all the things that we need to pay for, where does safety fall? Where's the line? And or is this simply just a way to empower us to act quickly if we need to for a project that might come up from unforeseen circumstances?
The most haunting thing in my career as a superintendent was December of 2012 when Sandy Hook took place. And I felt paralyzed because the district I was in at the time had vestibules and school entrances that were just wide open. And I wish I could say that in 2025 that we've addressed all the vestibules in our school. And I'm looking at Dr. Worley and she knows why. And so this resolution allows us to have a conversation. I think what I'm hearing from you, Mr. Wadier and Mr. Morris, is that at a minimum, it allows us to start having a conversation with our legislators and with the Department of Public Instruction to say, this board and this community feels so strongly about security that we may utilize Fund 80. So let's have a conversation now on what you deem and you support as a security project and what you don't consider to be a security project. I will take Mr. Morris's counsel on what do they consider to be an accessibility issue, and can we leverage it in the name of community and what's not acceptable. I think the resolution empowers us as a school system to declare that we believe that this is really important and to have conversations with those decision makers at the Department of Public Instruction and also legislators.
Okay, so it's more of us giving our seal of approval to start to work with the legislators to say, we would like to do this, or to be able to do this, give us some guidelines, some guardrails of what we should be operating in. And that way, a future board would be able, again, I'm assuming anything that would be done would already have gone through a process with the future board and planned out. And there would have already been several levels of checks and balances, but this is kind of saying, we don't need to plan something and then sit and wait for another year to get legislative approval to be able to use that money. We've already gone through the process. Theoretically, it's in the future, and this has all been hashed out because we've agreed to this today.
That is accurate. I think Ms. Laura Geisler, you've met her before. Our Director of Security, Mr. Price, the voice among high, you've heard him this evening. Mr. Pinion, our principals, we know where we have needs still from Mr. LaFountain. We know where we have needs. We just need funding to address those issues. And I'll go back to my earlier statement. The shooting in Madison this December was one in which it reminded me a great deal of what I felt in 2012, in December of 2012. It's not enough just to say our thoughts are with the educators and the families in that private school in Madison. We have to act. And so this resolution is positioning the Wauwatosa School District to have conversations with our compliance officers at the Department of Public Instruction and with our legislators to give this governing board some level of leverage to act quickly if there are, and we know we have needs to keep our schools safe or safer.
Last question on here. The resolutions like this, is it common, uncommon that schools will have a proactive or forward-looking resolution like this? Or would be setting any kind of precedent for others in our district to take up the same thing, or is it already happening?
It's very similar to what Dr. Hoyt stated earlier this evening, and what we heard from a community member during public comment. The state is looking to Wauwatosa for direction at this point. You heard it from Mr. Meyer. I think people look to Wauwatosa. And they look to this school board on where do you stand on the bigger macro issues, and not. That's why I know it's hard for, you know this, but I want to state it for the public's sake. That's why your job is so difficult, because you can get brought into micro issues. People need you to stay in the macro. And if you don't stay in the macro, then we're not having these conversations. So when you get into the micro, which you should, you want to be responsive, but boy, oh boy, if you're not in the macro, not only are we losing an opportunity in this school district, but you need to know that there are other school districts in the metropolitan area and across the state that are looking for your leadership. So I would say that, is it usual? No, it's not usual. And I think having a board speak through resolution is the highest level of governance that you can display. It demonstrates that you're a high functioning board when you're speaking on a macro issue through the form of a resolution.
We have a motion and a second. We've engaged in a good amount of board discussion and questions. Before I call the roll, is there any final questions, discussion, or any additional motions? I'm gonna go with Mr. Meyer and Dr. Rowley.
I'm always puzzled by when these disasters happen, is thoughts and prayers. Well, in my youth, my chosen higher power had a pastor who, when we asked him, if I pray to our higher power, will my higher power help me? And he said, your higher power already helped you. He gave you a brain, use it and do something. And this is do something. Put our voice out there, speak, and try to make the time, the power of an idea whose time has come. Our voice will help the time come where we do this better.
Just keep it really brief. I think that I just want to add that for so many ways we look to the larger community to provide security and safety. I mean, when we think about our fire department, our first responders, it just seems really appropriate to consider school safety this as a larger issue that we should find a solution for. Like Dr. Means, I remember sitting that day of Sandy Hook and, just being frozen in time and all the other times that have happened since then, and how many times we've said to our own children, go to school, and they've expressed fears around that. We need to move forward on doing better. And this is a creative and I think constructive pathway.
Seeing no other comments or questions, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyk,
Yes.
Mr. Wadier,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Heimer Rolland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes, that resolution passes. For a point of information for the board, before you depart this evening, I'm gonna ask, I'll actually send this around, to have everyone sign it. Before we push it out to a variety of different parties. Next on our agenda, action to approve school board legislation advocacy resolution. Summerall.
It is recommended that the school board approve the school board legislative advocacy resolution, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you.
All right, so every 2 years, our school district comes up with sort of a platform of what we're going to be requesting from a budgetary standpoint from the state. What you see in front of you, essentially our platform. There are lots of details in the resolution, but I just want to give you a little bit of background and why we landed on highlighting special education reimbursement rather than some of the other things that are out there, like per pupil dollars. So Mr. Ecker very nicely put together a PowerPoint of dollars and where the impact of each dollar would go, depending on what we asked for. And it was presented to the Legislative Advocacy Committee, so I'm sorry I don't have the slide for you to see, but I just want to kind of run through what would change. So right now, as you all remember, our special education reimbursement right now is, I think, 31-ish%, which is also a very loose number, which I learned, which I didn't realize, which is there's sort of a pot of money that's put aside. When that pot of money is gone, it's gone. So whether that reaches 31% for each school district or not is variable. And I believe for us, it really, in general, for the state of Wisconsin, it was closer to actually 29% reimbursement over the last year. So we are boldly asking for an increase of reimbursement to 90%. That would change our overall budget to about 9. So we'd have, in next school year, if that happened, we would have $9 million of money from special education reimbursement. Assuming there's sort of slight changes in dollars, that would be 9.5 million or 9.5, million in the following school year. So our total over the biennium would be $18.5 million of funding for our district. For many districts, that is the difference in their entire referendum dollars. Ours doesn't quite add up to exactly that, but it is quite close. Alternatively, if we were just to change and ask for an increase in per pupil dollars, that would have a much smaller impact. Over the course of the biennium would be something like 1.1 million. So 1.1 million versus 18.5 million. So to us, while both would be great, both a per pupil increase and an increase in special education reimbursement, in order to make our argument very clean, very concise, very direct, we have landed on the special education reimbursement as our particular legislative platform. That brings us then to this resolution. I recently had the joy, it actually was quite joyful, of going to the WPenn budget blast off in Madison. And I was really surprised. Like, I think we're really important, but I was really surprised by how many people came up to me hearing that we were talking about 90% at the Legislative Advocacy Committee and were like, you have to put together a resolution. Like, other districts are looking to you. You need to put it together and you need to send that resolution out to other communities across the state to let them know what we're asking, to let them know what you are asking for, in hopes that they will then join in asking for the same thing. So to reiterate what Dr. Bean said, districts are looking to us to be leaders in this space and to kind of set the tone for how bold of a request we're making.
Thank you, Dr. Hoig. Comments and questions from the board? Mr. Meyer.
So I'm going to, I have a concern related to students with disabilities. And it is an additional direction to what is here for a resolution. And I have a drafted amendment. I'm not going to make the motion to amend. I'm going to hand out the verbiage so you know what it is, so we can discuss it. And a motion might not be appropriate for the reasons I stated about motions to amend the WSD resolutions, that words haven't been vetted and there can be unintended consequences. But as a starter here, to raise visibility to this, there are things we could do. We could decide we're not going to do anything with this. We could decide to look to the Legislative Advocacy Committee and take this up and have some sort of informal commitment. I could make the motion to amend, somebody could second, and then I could make a motion to refer the proposed amendment to the Legislative Advocacy Committee for their consideration with the timeline for their report left to their discretion. I mean, there's all kind of ways to do this, but I thought it very important to raise this topic tonight while we're talking about advocacy and legislation for students with disabilities, that we bring visibility to it. And then I will have accomplished my goal for tonight, and the will of the board then is the will of the board. So the language is, so amend for the end of the last paragraph and say, and further endorse legislation requiring the daily recording, systematic analysis, and annual reporting of all incidents of verbal and physical aggression of all levels of severity against students with disabilities. So the problem is, and I'm very, very sure of this, and I've discussed this with various people who are expert in the area, we have a blind spot in our data. The blind spot is sort of like the death by 1,000 cuts concept. And Dr. Means, you were nodding yes, and Mr. Pinion as well. I haven't warned you that I was going to bring this up. So we need to do something to capture that relentless needling of people or criticizing people or berating them, that, kind of, if it happens once, you kind of, just keep walking and don't worry about it, but when it happens over and over again, and students go home in despair, and sometimes actually, and we've had a case, try to hurt themselves. So here's the language. And if the board will just read this, and I've read it out loud, so this paper I'm handing around is now on the record on camera here, that this is the language. If there's an appropriate and efficient way for us to address this as a board, to work with DPI, to try to do more, to understand the plight of the people who are the victims of the bullying. And it's become not so fruitful to talk about discipline. I wanted, and the offenders and what we do there. I think we need to have data to understand the plight of the victims, and we need better data. So that's what I have to say.
That's a great suggestion. I want to defer to Mr. Lou Pinion, our Chief of People and Family Supports, to get your response to this outstanding proposed amendment, sir.
Sure. And this is, just receiving this now, so I'm thinking out loud and kind of processing. I do not disagree that this would be really good information to have and that there may be a blind spot there. My initial wonders, however, center around current processes we have in place for harassment, discrimination against protected classes, and making sure we do our due diligence when reports are made that something is based on a disability or based on a protected class. I also wonder if we're talking about legislation or, advocacy at the legislative level, what about other protected classes?
Yes, I mean, I don't think it's a good idea for the very reasons I stated about the WSD amendments on the floor to vote on any language tonight. I do think it's a good idea if administration agrees and the board agrees that somehow we put some effort into looking at this to define the problem, to confirm whether there is a problem. I'm quite sure there is, but what's the size of it? What's the impact of it? And what would this solution be to fill the gap if there is one?
So may I ask a favor of you, sir?
Yes.
So I think what I'm hearing from Mr. Pinion is that we like the language and we appreciate you bringing this forward. Do you mind giving us some time to continue to dive into, I'm thinking of creating some type of resolution around welcoming environments, not just identifying one group, but many groups of students, and allow us to work with the current legislative advocacy committee to bring something back to the full board before April.
My belief, it is rare that a first idea is an acceptable, final good idea, but that ideas and creative thinking beget other ideas, and those ideas might be the ones that are adopted.
So we appreciate and take on the challenge of trying to bring something forward that will include this language, but will cover many different
Yes.
student groups.
Yes.
And so we will bring something back to the advocacy committee and then subsequently the full board.
It could be aggressions with respect to any protected class, any and
Yes.
all
Rather
protected
than
classes.
resolution.
Right. Why do people get picked on? I mean, I don't know, but somehow we need to concern ourselves, as a parent has said to us, the rights of the victim now seem to be less than the rights of the offender. And yes, the offender is deserving of rights, absolutely. But we just need to put more bandwidth to the victim as well. And somehow that can help solve the question about the offender, I think.
Sure.
Mr. Myers, one of two members of the Legislative Advocacy Committee, I'd certainly welcome you to join us and
Okay.
at the point where it comes to us that you join us for that meeting.
Okay, so I will not make a motion. There is a moral
You will take
commitment
this
from people to pick this up and address it. And then I've done what I hoped to do tonight from this chair, is try to do something.
Do
Do something.
if I
Yeah.
could.
I love what you've written here. This was my life for a full year and a half, several years ago. I definitely think it could go through several iterations and become something that would really cement the issue real easily. I can this language alone isn't enough to
Right, and
protect
and that language could be unwieldy and ineffective when I say all levels of severity. The problem is that only the most severe things are actually recorded now.
right.
And we don't know how many little events become a big event, and it's not defined. So I'm sorry to cut. I had a habit of cutting people. I'm sorry. But yeah, I totally hear. I'm not sold on this language, but I wanted to start with something.
No, I think it's a great idea. I would also love to put some input into this, if the board is okay with that. And yeah, I mean, there are just things that the disabled community could also probably be pulled on in order to get feedback on something like this. For instance, any child that is nonverbal, there has got to be a completely separate way of recording information like this. They're not going to be able to articulate what has happened. There's also just several different levels of and I'm sure Mr. Pinion knows all the different kinds, and not just from the disability community, but from all different communities. So yeah, I think this is extremely important, and I thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I just want to also comment that we did receive a community member reached out to the board over the weekend. I was able to then close the loop and talk with that community member, and the current version that is on display right now represents the conversation that I had with that community member and their suggested recommendations for refining the document. It's currently in front of you as a draft. We believe that the language of 90% is important because we know that the federal government has made an ongoing commitment to fund at least 10% of special education services. That's why we're suggesting the 90%, because typically people will say, why not 100? We also believe that from an agenda for this school board in this district, that we should also speak with our values, and we know that the underfunding of special education services has been a burden on the families of children with special needs services. We also understand that private choice schools are getting a higher reimbursement rate. And so we're not treating kids who go to certain schools the same way that we should treat all kids. And so that's some of the other language behind this resolution.
I want to underline that. Private schools in Wisconsin right now are being reimbursed at a higher rate than public.
Private choice schools, yes.
I think at 90%. Yeah, I believe at
It is
90%.
So we are asking for
Comparable.
the equal level. Any final board discussion? Okay. Let's call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
excuse me, Dr. Hoyt,
Yes.
Mr. Wadier,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Hammer Rolland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessa Banger.
Yes, this resolution passes. I will be passing this one around. Yes, I said the right date.
Yeah, and 27th, yes. I'm clunky on typos, so we.
The third and final is action to approve school board secure storage notification resolution. Mr. Wadier?
It is recommended that the school board approve the school board secure storage notification resolution, and I so move.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Dr. Hoyt?
Okay. So this particular resolution, again, highlights the impact of gun violence on students. It's kind of comes back a little bit to our conversation before, related to safety and security in the buildings, but it is more even than that. And recognizing that safe storage, that's the word I'm looking for, safe storage of firearms is the best and safest way to keep all children safe. So what this resolution would do would allow Dr. Means and his team to update the student handbook. So there would be information about the importance of secure gun storage, the legal requirements for parents or guardians to securely store firearms, and best practices for keeping guns unloaded, locked up, and separating the gun from ammunition. This would also direct Dr. Means to create a letter to parents and guardians that explains the importance of secure gun storage. And again, kind of highlighting for them some of that same information that would be in the student handbook. Parents would also get that information. So it's a start. It is, again, something that we can do in our own community to hopefully highlight and reiterate the importance of gun storage, safe gun storage.
More questions and comments? Listen, Mr. Meyer.
I see this as definitely, clearly not pro-gun or anti-gun. This is pro-safety.
Yes. It's all about storage.
Yes, and education of gun owners to keep everyone safe, including, themselves, not to suggest that anybody isn't safe, but safety practices need to be, everyone needs education on anything I've ever done that has a danger level to it. Education is needed on a recurring basis in order to stay safe. Thank you.
There are several organizations and projects in town that are giving away gun locks. And I know that's not something for the resolution, but I would just put that out there that, it's something that either we could provide that information as part of that list or think about how we might make gun locks accessible. To Mr. Meyer's point, these are just safety devices. It's, like remembering to turn your stove off. Secure it the way it needs to be secured. And that's something, there's a lot of that available in the community, but people don't always know how to access one.
I think the new vending machines by the city hall have gun storage, gun locks. Thank you.
The only thing I would just add is I can guarantee you, I had a conversation with a local superintendent on Friday that their school district is watching to see what you do tonight. Just to give you a perspective on, that school system is interested in moving forward with this type of conversation. They're interested in seeing what type of leadership you will apply in the metro area.
I don't know if people are aware. I know we had talked about potentially putting this in the resolution, but I don't see it in there. But if people don't know, gun violence is actually for the third year, it is the leading cause of death for children. So this is a start. It can't be the end of the conversation, though.
And accidents kill as well. Gun accidents. Right.
Besides, these are.
Right. I know. I completely agree with you. And I'll say, even accidents kill with guns.
Yes.
Or maim. And so these procedures help prevent accidents by well-intentioned people and responsible people. Safety practices have a safety effect. And so I want to emphasize that as well.
Any other board comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyk,
Yes.
Mr. Wadier,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Hammer Walland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. And this item passes as well. Make sure to sign before anybody leaves the room this evening, please. With that, we have come to the end of our agenda. Thank you to everyone who is here tonight to advocate on issues that are important to you. For those watching at home and in the room, we appreciate your engagement. For my colleagues on the board, thank you for your continued service, and for all the educators in the room and in our classrooms. Thank you. May I have
The time is,
a motion to adjourn at 8:44 p.m.?
I move to adjourn.
And a second? Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Dr. Hoyk,
Yes.
Mr. Wadier,
Yes.
Dr. Worley,
Yes.
Ms. Hammer Walland,
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Dr. Jessup Banger.
Yes. See you in a few weeks.